The dust of the frontier town of Bitter Creek hung in the air like a shroud, turning the afternoon sun into a dull coppered disk. It was the summer of 1873, and the drought had been merciless, leaving the earth cracked and the people harder than the ground they walked on. This was no place for the weak, the soft, or the unwanted. Clara Whitman stood in the doorway of the ramshackle house that had never truly been her home, clutching a worn carpetbag that held everything she owned in this world. At 28, she was already a widow. Her husband Jacob dead these past 3 months from a mining accident that left her with nothing but debt and the scorn of his family. "You've eaten enough of our charity," her sister-in-law Martha spat, her thin face twisted with disgust as she looked Clara up and down. "Time you found your own way. A woman of your size. Surely there's work somewhere for you." Clara's hands tightened on the bag's handle. She had always been what folks called stout. Her mother had said she was built for bearing children, though God had never blessed her with any during her 5 years of marriage. Jacob hadn't minded her fuller figure when he'd courted her, but poverty and drink had turned him mean, and her body became just another thing for him to curse. "Where am I to go?" Clara asked quietly, though she already knew the answer written in Martha's cold eyes. "That's not our concern. Jacob's debts died with him, and so did any obligation we had to you." Martha's husband Tom appeared behind her, a cruel smile playing on his weathered face. "Though there might be one option," Tom said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his vest. "Man named Silas Crane runs a service for frontier men needing help. He pays for women willing to work." Clara's stomach turned. She knew what kind of service Crane operated. Everyone in Bitter Creek did. He collected desperate women and hired them out as housekeepers, cooks, and worse, to isolated ranchers and miners. It was barely a step above selling oneself on the street. "I won't." "You will, or you'll starve." Martha cut her off. "Crane's already paid us for you. $5 silver. More than you're worth, if you ask me." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Sold, like a livestock, for $5 silver. Before she could speak, Tom grabbed her arm roughly and hauled her toward a wagon waiting in the dusty street. Silas Crane sat on the driver's bench, a greasy man with yellowed teeth and eyes that crawled over her body like spiders. Well, well," Crane drawled, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "You're a hefty one, aren't you? Still, some men like a woman with meat on her bones. Keeps 'em warm through the winter." His laugh was like the rattle of dry bones. Clara was pushed onto the wagon bed with 2 other women, one barely more than a girl with hollow eyes, the other older and worn down to nothing but sharp angles and bitter silence. As the wagon lurched forward, Clara looked back once at the town that had never welcomed her, at the few people who watched her departure with indifference or sneering satisfaction. The journey took 4 days through country that grew progressively wilder and more desolate. They followed rutted tracks that could barely be called roads, stopping at way stations where men looked at them like cuts of meat in a butcher's window. Clara kept her eyes down, her hands folded, making herself as small as someone of her size could be. Crane fed them hardtack and water, just enough to keep them alive. At night, they slept under the wagon, and Clara learned to ignore the sounds from Crane's bedroll when he took the younger girl away from the others. On the 4th day, the landscape changed. The scattered homesteads disappeared, replaced by endless grassland broken only by distant mesas and the occasional withered cottonwood. The sky seemed to press down, vast and empty, mirroring the hollow feeling in Clara's chest. "Next stop's yours," Crane announced, pointing to a cluster of buildings barely visible through the heat shimmer. "Luke Callahan's place. Queer fellow. Keeps to himself. Barely comes to town twice a year. Lost his wife some years back. He paid for winter help, someone who can cook and won't run off at the first cold snap." As they approached, Clara could make out the details of the ranch. It was larger than she'd expected, but had an air of neglect about it. The main house was built of logs and stone, solid but weathered. A few outbuildings scattered nearby looked equally worn. She could see cattle in the distance, thin and dusty, and a single horse in a corral near the barn. The wagon stopped in front of the house, and Crane bellowed, "Callahan! Got your woman!" The door opened, and Clara got her first look at the man who had paid for her services. Luke Callahan was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with the lean, hard build of someone who worked from dawn to dusk. His face was all angles, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of winter sky. He might have been handsome once, but grief had carved deep lines around his eyes and mouth, aging him beyond his years. Clara guessed him to be in his mid-30s. Those pale eyes moved over her once, quick and assessing, before turning to Crane. "You're late." "Road was rough," Crane said, not bothering to hide his leer as he watched Clara climb awkwardly down from the wagon. "This here's Clara. She'll do you through winter, maybe longer if you treat her right." Luke's jaw tightened at Crane's tone, but he said nothing, just handed over a small leather pouch. Crane weighed it in his palm, nodded, and climbed back onto his wagon. "You change your mind about her. You know where to find me," Crane called as he drove away, leaving Clara standing in the dust with her carpet bag, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. Luke Callahan studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct told her to look away. She'd learned that men saw what they wanted to see, a body to use, a servant to command, a burden to bear. She waited for the familiar look of disappointment or disgust. Instead, he simply said, "You'll want to get settled before dark. Your room's inside. First door on the right. Supper's at 6. Then he turned and walked toward the barn without another word. Clara stood there, confused by the absence of cruelty or hunger in his manner. Slowly, she picked up her bag and walked into the house that would be her home through the long winter ahead. The interior was sparse but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and a few chairs. Everything was functional, built to last, but there were no softening touches, no curtains, no pictures, nothing that spoke of a woman's presence. Her room was small but private, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and hooks on the wall for clothing. The window looked out over the endless prairie. As she unpacked her few belongings, Clara allowed herself one moment of grief for how far she'd fallen, from a married woman with hopes of children and a home, to this, bought help for a man who seemed as cold and empty as the land around them. But grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Winter was coming to this desolate place, and she would survive it, just as she'd survived everything else. She changed into her work dress, tied her hair back, and went to explore the kitchen. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Clara began preparing the first meal in her new life. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if Luke Callahan would be kind or cruel, distant or demanding. All she knew was that she was worth $5 silver, and that would have to be enough. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow and the lonesome cry of a coyote. Winter was indeed coming to Luke Callahan's ranch, and with it, perhaps, a chance for 2 broken souls to find something neither expected in this harsh and unforgiving land. The first weeks at the Callahan ranch passed in a rhythm of hard work and careful silence. Clara rose before dawn each day, stoking the fire in the great stone hearth and preparing breakfast, biscuits, bacon, black coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Luke would appear precisely at sunrise, eat without comment, and disappear into the endless work of keeping a ranch running with too few hands. She learned his routines without being told. He took his coffee black, no sugar. He preferred his beef well done and his vegetables soft. He ate everything she put before him, but never asked for seconds, never complained, never complimented. It was as if she were a ghost in his house, necessary but unseen. Clara threw herself into the work. Beyond cooking, there was washing and mending, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, tending the kitchen garden that had gone wild with neglect. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos, in seeing Luke's shirts clean and pressed, in watching the garden slowly respond to her care, despite the lateness of the season. One morning, she discovered a lame horse in the smaller corral, a bay mare with a gentle eye and a badly swollen fetlock. The animal had been separated from the others, left with hay and water but little else. Clara had learned some healing from her grandmother and couldn't bear to see the creature suffer. "What happened to her?" she asked Luke that evening. The first real question she'd voiced since arriving. He looked up from his plate, seeming surprised she'd spoken. "Stepped in a gopher hole. She's done for." "May I tend to her?" Waste of time. But he didn't forbid it, so Clara took that as permission. She spent her spare moments with the mare, whom she named Belle, applying poultices of comfrey and willow bark, gently exercising the leg, speaking soft words of encouragement. Luke watched from a distance sometimes, his expression unreadable. October turned to November, and with it came the first real cold. Clara had been at the ranch for 6 weeks when the fever struck. She'd been working in the garden, trying to save the last of the squash before the frost, when the dizziness hit. By evening, she was burning up, shivering uncontrollably despite the blankets she'd piled on her narrow bed. She tried to rise for the morning chores, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Through the haze of fever, she heard Luke's footsteps, heard him call her name, the first time he'd used it since Crane had left her there. "Clara." The door to her room opened. She tried to speak, to apologize for not having breakfast ready, but only a weak moan escaped. Then he was there, his cool hand on her burning forehead, his voice low and urgent. "Christ, how long have you been like this?" She lost track of time after that. There were moments of lucidity, Luke spooning broth between her cracked lips, his hands gentle as he helped her sit up, the sound of his voice reading from a book she couldn't quite focus on. Once. She woke to find him asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head resting on his folded arms, and she wondered if she was dreaming. The fever broke after 3 days. Clara woke to weak winter sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of something burning in the kitchen. She struggled to sit up, her body feeling hollow and strange. Luke appeared in the doorway, holding a plate of what might charitably be called eggs. "You're awake." There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Relief? "I'm sorry," she whispered, her throat raw. "The work." "The work can go to hell." He set the plate down harder than necessary. "You nearly died. You stayed with me." He turned away, but not before she caught something vulnerable in his expression. "Couldn't let you die. Not in my house. Not again." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara understood then that he'd sat vigil over another woman in this house, had watched her slip away despite his efforts. The knowledge shifted something fundamental in how she saw him. When she was strong enough to leave her bed, their relationship had changed. Luke still spoke little, but he watched her now, really looked at her. He began taking his coffee in the kitchen instead of heading straight out to work. He mentioned when he'd be late coming in. Small things, but Clara treasured each one. One evening, as the first real snow began to fall, he surprised her by speaking during dinner. "That mare, Belle, her leg's better." Clara smiled, the expression feeling foreign on her face. "She just needed someone to believe she could heal." "That's so?" His pale eyes studied her. "My wife, Mary, she had a way with animals too. Said they knew when someone cared." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife by name. Clara held very still, afraid to break the moment. "She died, having our baby," he continued, his voice flat. "Doctor said the baby was too big, that she was too small. They both—" He stopped, jaw working. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "It was 5 years ago. Sometimes feels like yesterday. Sometimes feels like a lifetime." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You remind me of her." Clara's heart sank. Of course, she was just a ghost of another woman, a pale substitute. But Luke shook his head as if reading her thoughts. "Not in looks, in spirit, the way you don't give up on things others would abandon." That night, the blizzard hit in earnest. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow against the windows until the world outside disappeared entirely. The temperature plummeted until even the great fireplace couldn't keep the cold at bay. Clara had banked the fire in her room and burrowed under every blanket she could find, but her teeth still chattered. She heard footsteps in the hall. Then a soft knock. "Clara, you'll freeze in there. Come to the main room." She found Luke feeding logs into the fireplace. A pile of blankets and pillows arranged on the floor nearby. "We'll need to stay close to the fire tonight. This storm's going to be a bad one." They settled on opposite sides of the makeshift bed, the propriety of the situation weighing on Clara's mind. But as the night deepened and the cold pressed in like a living thing, such concerns seemed foolish. They moved closer to the fire, closer to each other, until they lay side by side under the shared blankets, not touching but aware of each other's warmth. "Tell me about before," Luke said into the darkness. "About your life." So Clara did. She told him about growing up poor but loved, about her parents' death from typhoid, about Jacob and how hope had turned to disappointment and then to mere endurance. She told him about the baby she'd lost early in her marriage, the one Jacob had blamed her for losing. She even told him about being sold for $5 silver, though her voice broke on the words. When she finished, Luke was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "You deserved better. We don't always get what we deserve. No." His hand found hers under the blankets, a brief squeeze before pulling away. "But sometimes we get what we need." The storm raged for 2 days. They lived in that small circle of warmth by the fire, sharing stories and silences, meals cobbled together from what didn't require cooking. Luke told her about growing up in Texas, about driving cattle north, about meeting Mary at a dance and knowing instantly she was the one. He talked about building this ranch for her, for the family they'd planned. By the time the storm cleared, something had fundamentally shifted between them. They were no longer employer and hired help, but something harder to define. Luke began helping with dishes after dinner. Clara started joining him on the porch in the evenings, watching the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. One night, as December deepened toward Christmas, Luke reached over and wiped a smudge of flour from her cheek. His thumb lingered on her skin, and their eyes met and held. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. But the moment broke when he pulled away, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. He looked at her with something like anguish. "You're here because you had no choice. I won't be another man who takes advantage of that. You're not— Good night, Clara." And he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying fire and a heart full of words she couldn't say. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, covering the harsh landscape in a blanket of white. Clara touched her cheek where his thumb had rested and wondered if spring would ever come to this frozen place, if either of them would survive the thaw when it did. December deepened its hold on the prairie, and with it came a new rhythm to life at the ranch. Luke and Clara worked side by side now, their movements synchronized through repetition and growing understanding. He would hold the gate while she fed the chickens. She would steady the ladder while he repaired loose shingles before the next storm. Their hands would brush as they passed tools or dishes, each touch a small flame in the winter cold. The careful distance Luke had tried to maintain after that night by the fire gradually eroded like snow in a Chinook wind. He found excuses to linger in the kitchen, helping her knead bread or carrying water from the well. Clara discovered reasons to be in the barn when he worked with the horses, holding tack or passing him tools. "You're spoiling that mare," he said one afternoon, watching Clara brush Belle's coat until it gleamed like polished mahogany. The horse's leg had healed completely, and she followed Clara around the corral like an oversized dog. "She deserves a little spoiling," Clara replied, working a tangle from Belle's mane. "We all do, sometimes." Luke's eyes softened as he watched them. Mary used to say the same thing. The mention of his late wife no longer carried the sharp edge of pain, but rather a gentle melancholy. "She would have liked you." Christmas approached with no fanfare. Clara had found some red ribbon in a drawer and tied small bows on the kitchen curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks. It wasn't much, but it brought a touch of warmth to the sparse room. She'd been saving sugar and cinnamon to make sweet rolls for Christmas morning, a luxury in their simple existence. 2 days before Christmas, another storm rolled in, though gentler than the last. They worked together to secure everything, Luke checking on the animals while Clara prepared for being snowed in again. As evening fell, they found themselves once more by the great fireplace. But this time the awkwardness was gone. They sat close on the old sofa he'd pulled near the hearth, sharing a quilt Clara had repaired. "I have something for you," Luke said suddenly, producing a small, wrapped bundle from behind his back. Clara's hands trembled as she took it. Inside was a delicate ivory comb, carved with tiny flowers. It was beautiful and completely impractical for a woman in her position. "It was Mary's," Luke said quietly. "Been sitting in a drawer for 5 years. She would hate that. She believed beautiful things should be used, not hidden away." "Luke, I can't. Please." His hand covered hers. "I want you to have it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just the gift, it was what it represented. An acknowledgement that she was more than hired help, more than a convenience, that she was worthy of beautiful things. "I don't have anything for you," she whispered. "You've given me more than you know." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "This house was a tomb before you came. I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought life back to this place. To me." The firelight danced across his face, softening the harsh angles, revealing the man beneath the armor of grief. Clara turned her hand palm up, lacing her fingers through his. "Luke!" He leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "If this isn't what you want, tell me now." Instead, Clara closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might disappear. Then Luke's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and the kiss deepened into something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Luke rested his forehead against hers. "Clara, he struggled with the words. "I need you to know this isn't because you're convenient or available. This is your—" "I know," she said softly, her hands framing his face. "I know." They came together again, and this time there was no hesitation. The quilt fell away as Luke pulled her onto his lap, his hands tangling in her hair, loosening the pins until it fell around her shoulders. Clara had been desired before, but never like this, never with such reverence, such careful attention to her responses. "So beautiful," Luke murmured against her throat, and Clara almost laughed because no one had ever called her beautiful. Sturdy, yes. Useful, certainly, but never beautiful. They made love there by the fire as the snow fell outside, their bodies finding a rhythm as natural as their shared work. Luke's hands and mouth worshipped every curve, every soft place that others had mocked or ignored. Clara discovered the scars on his back from a lifetime of hard labor, the place on his ribs where a horse had kicked him, the sensitive spot just below his ear that made him groan when she kissed it. Afterward, they lay entwined on the floor. The quilt pulled over their cooling bodies. Clara's head rested on Luke's chest, listening to his heartbeat slowly return to normal. "Stay with me," he said into the darkness. "Not just for the winter. Stay." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Luke, I'm still just hired help. The town, your neighbors, they'll talk. Let them." His arms tightened around her. "I've spent 5 years caring what others think. 5 years half dead because it was easier than feeling. I'm done with that." "I'm not Mary," Clara said, voicing the fear that had haunted her. "I can't replace her. I don't want you to be Mary." Luke sat up, pulling her with him so they faced each other. "Mary was my past. She was sweet and gentle and fragile, and I loved her. But you're strong. You're a survivor. You don't need me. Clara, not really. You could leave here and make your way. but you choose to stay. That means more than you know." Clara touched his face, feeling the stubble beneath her palm. "I do need you," she admitted. "Not for shelter or food. I need this, us, the way you see me." They moved to his bedroom that night, Clara bringing the ivory comb with her. Luke watched as she used it to pin up her hair the next morning, and the smile on his face was worth more than any gift. The days between Christmas and New Year passed in a haze of discovery. They learned each other's bodies. Yes, but more than that, they learned each other's hearts. Luke told her about his fear of losing another woman he loved, how he'd sworn never to risk that pain again. Clara shared her terror of not being enough, of being discarded again when someone better came along. "There is no one better," Luke said fiercely when she confessed this. "Don't you understand? You're not here because I settled. You're here because fate knew what I needed better than I did." One evening, as Clara prepared dinner, Luke came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. It was such a simple gesture, but it made her heart soar. Jacob had never held her just to hold her, never touched her without wanting something more. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How different this is," she said honestly. "How different you are." "Good different?" She turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. "The best different." But even in their happiness, reality intruded. Their supplies were running low, and soon Luke would need to make the trip to town. The thought of facing those people, the ones who had watched her be sold, who had sneered at her size and circumstances, made Clara's stomach clench. "We'll go together," Luke decided when she voiced her fears. "Let them see that you're with me now, that you're under my protection." "I'm not sure that will help," Clara said wryly. "More likely they'll pity you for taking in damaged goods." Luke's expression darkened. "Anyone who says that will answer to me. You're going to be my wife, Clara. They'd best get used to it." Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Your wife?" He seemed to realize what he'd said, but didn't take it back. Instead, he moved closer, taking her wet hands in his. "If you'll have me, I know it's soon. I know we should wait, but I almost lost you to that fever. I've learned that tomorrow isn't promised. So yes, my wife, if you're willing." Clara searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret. She found only determination and a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll be your wife." Luke whooped, and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested about her soapy hands. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. That night, as the old year prepared to give way to the new, they lay in bed making plans. A spring wedding, Luke suggested. When the wildflowers bloomed, Clara wanted to plant a proper garden, maybe get some milk cows. They would hire hands to help with the ranch work, young men who needed a chance like Luke had once been given. "We'll make this place prosper," Luke said. His hand splayed across Clara's belly as if he could divine the future there. "Build it up proper. Maybe there'll be children." Clara covered his hand with hers. The doctor who'd attended her miscarriage had said she might have trouble carrying a baby to term, but she didn't voice that fear. Instead, she said, "Maybe there will." As 1873 gave way to 1874, snow began to fall again. But inside the ranch house, two people who had known too much cold had found their warmth. Outside, Belle whinnied in the barn, and the cattle lowed softly in their shelter. The world was harsh and unforgiving. But here, in this moment, love had carved out a space of safety and belonging. Clara fingered the ivory comb on the nightstand, thinking of the woman who had owned it before, grateful for her in a strange way. Without Mary, Luke wouldn't be who he was. Without loss, they might never have recognized the precious gift they'd found in each other. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked sleepily, pulling her closer. "That broken things can be mended," she said. "Sometimes they're stronger for having been broken. Like us," he murmured against her hair. Like us, she agreed, and settled into sleep, safe in the arms of a man who saw her worth as greater than gold. The morning they rode into Bitter Creek, the sky was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of more snow. Clara sat beside Luke on the wagon seat, wearing her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and the blue wool coat he'd surprised her with from Mary's trunk. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, the ivory comb holding her hair in a neat chignon. "Stop fretting," Luke said quietly, his hand briefly covering hers. "We're just buying supplies." But they both knew it was more than that. This was Clara's first return to town since being sold like livestock 4 months ago. The news of where she'd ended up, and with whom, would have traveled through the gossip chains faster than wildfire. As they rolled down Main Street, heads turned, Clara saw Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, whisper urgently to her companion. 2 men outside the saloon nudged each other, grinning. She forced her spine straight, her chin up, even as her insides churned. Luke pulled the wagon up outside Morrison's general store. He climbed down first, then turned to help Clara, his hands firm on her waist as he lifted her down. The gesture was deliberately possessive, and Clara saw it register on the faces watching from the boardwalk. Mr. Callahan. Morrison greeted as they entered, his eyes sliding to Clara with barely concealed curiosity. "Ma'am, what can I do for you today?" Luke handed over a list, his manner brusque and businesslike. As Morrison began gathering items, his wife emerged from the back room. Agnes Morrison was the town's premier gossip, a sharp-faced woman who collected others' misfortunes like some collected stamps. "Why, Clara Whitman," she said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "What a surprise. We heard you'd found employment out at the Callahan place." "Mrs. Callahan," Luke corrected flatly. "Or soon to be. We're to be married come spring." The words dropped into the store like stones in still water. Agnes's mouth fell open, and her husband nearly dropped the flour sack he was holding. "Married?" Agnes sputtered. "But that is... how wonderful." Her tone suggested it was anything but. Clara found her voice. "Mr. Callahan has been very kind." "Kind." Agnes's laugh was like breaking glass. "Is that what we're calling it now? Well, I suppose a man gets lonely out there, and in winter. Any port in a storm, as they say." Luke's hand moved to his hip, where his gun usually rested. He wasn't wearing it in town, but the gesture was clear. "You'll speak to my fiancée with respect, Mrs. Morrison, or you won't speak to her at all." The temperature in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison hurried to complete their order, clearly wanting them gone before blood was shed in his establishment. They made several more stops. The feed store, the blacksmith, and each time, the reception was the same. Shock, followed by thinly veiled contempt or pity. By the time they reached the last stop, Clara was trembling with suppressed hurt and rage. "One more," Luke said gently. "Then we can go home." But as they approached the mining office to collect payment for beef Luke had sold, a crowd had gathered outside the saloon. At its center was Tom, Clara's former brother-in-law, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Paid $5 silver for her. Can you believe it? Crane said Callahan must be desperate indeed to take another man's leavings, though I suppose when she's built like a brood sow, she'll keep him warm enough." Luke was off the wagon before Clara could stop him. The crowd parted as he strode through, and his fist connected with Tom's jaw before the man could finish his sentence. Tom went down hard, blood spurting from his nose. "Get up," Luke said quietly, and something in his voice made the crowd step back. "Get up so I can knock you down again." Tom scrambled backward in the dirt. "You're crazy. Callahan, getting violent over that fat—" Luke's boot connected with Tom's ribs, cutting off the word. "That's my future wife you're speaking of, the woman worth more to me than every acre of land I own, every head of cattle, every dollar in the bank." His voice rose so the entire street could hear. "Any man who speaks ill of her speaks ill of me, and I'll answer it every time." He turned, finding Clara in the crowd. She'd climbed down from the wagon, tears streaming down her face. Luke went to her immediately, his bloodied knuckles gentle as he wiped her cheeks. "Don't cry over them," he said softly. "They're not worth your tears." "I'm not crying because of them," Clara managed. "I'm crying because of you. No one's ever defended me before." Luke pulled her against him, right there in the middle of Main Street, in full view of half the town. "Get used to it," he murmured against her hair. "I'll defend you until my last breath." Someone in the crowd snickered. "Look at them, the hermit and the hefty widow. What a pair." Luke started to turn, but Clara caught his arm. "No," she said firmly. "They're not worth it. Take me home. Luke, please." The ride back to the ranch was silent at first. Clara stared at the passing landscape, trying to reconcile the tender man beside her with the fury she'd witnessed in town. Finally, she spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His jaw was tight. "I won't have anyone speaking of you that way. So, they'll always see me as the widow who was sold, as someone who's worth $5 silver. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop right there on the empty road. He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked fiercely. "I see the woman who saved Belle when I'd given up, who brought music back to my kitchen with her humming, who held my hand through the darkest nights and didn't run when I told her my worst pain. I see strength and kindness and a beauty that goes soul deep. That's worth more than all the silver in Colorado." Clara's throat was too tight for words. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and soap and Luke. "I love you," she whispered, the first time she'd said the words. His arms came around her, holding her close. "And I love you. Let the town talk. Let them gossip and sneer. They don't know what we have." When they finally made it home, the weather had turned. Snow began falling in earnest, thick curtains of white that isolated the ranch from the outside world. Clara was grateful for it. Out here, the opinions of small-minded people couldn't touch them. As she unpacked their supplies, she found an envelope at the bottom of one crate. Her name was written on it in spidery handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a dried wildflower pressed flat. "Clara," the note read, "I knew Mary Callahan. She was my friend. She would be so happy to know Luke found love again, especially with someone strong enough to match him. Not everyone in town is blind. Be happy, dear. You deserve it. Mrs. Emma Patterson." Clara held the flower, a prairie rose, and felt something ease in her chest. One ally. One person who saw beyond the surface. It was a start. That evening, as the storm raged outside, Luke found Clara standing by the window, watching the snow erase the world. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I was just thinking. They're right about one thing. I was sold for $5 silver. That's a fact that won't change." Luke's arms tightened. "Clara, but they're wrong about what it means." She continued. "They think it defines my worth. But all it really shows is how blind they were to value. Their loss was my gain, because it brought me to you." Luke turned her in his arms, kissing her deeply. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked roughly. "It wasn't luck," Clara said, thinking of all the pain that had led them to each other. "It was grace. Painful, difficult grace. That night, the storm howled like a living thing, but inside the ranch house, there was warmth and light and love." Clara made a special dinner beef stew rich with vegetables from her root cellar, fresh bread, and using precious sugar, a molasses cake. "What's the occasion?" Luke asked, savoring each bite. "We're alive." Clara said simply, "We're together. We're in love. That's occasion enough." After dinner, they sat by the fire, Clara in Luke's lap, his hands gentle in her hair. She told him about Mrs. Patterson's note, and he smiled. "Emma Patterson's good people. Her husband died in the war. She knows about starting over, about second chances. Maybe we could have her to dinner sometime, Clara suggested tentatively. When the weather clears. I'd like that. This house needs more life in it, more voices, more laughter. His hand slipped to her belly again, that increasingly common gesture. Maybe soon there'll be other voices too, little ones. Clara caught his hand, pressing it flat against her. Luke, the doctor said after I lost the baby, he said I might not be able to. Shh, he kissed her temple. If we have children, we'll love them. If we don't, we'll love each other. Either way, we'll have a family. The simplicity of his acceptance, the certainty of his love, undid her. Clara turned in his arms, burying her face in his neck as tears came, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. I don't deserve you, she whispered. That's where you're wrong, Luke said firmly. We deserve each other. We deserve every bit of happiness we can grab from this hard life. Outside, the storm began to ease, the wind dying to a whisper. Tomorrow would bring clear skies and the endless work of the ranch. There would be more trips to town, more sneers and whispers to endure. But there would also be this man, this love, this home they were building together. Clara rose, holding out her hand to Luke. Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow's a new day. He took her hand, following her to their room, to their bed, to their future. And somewhere in the darkness, Bell nickered softly in the barn, the sound carrying on the wind like a benediction. Word of Luke's confrontation with Tom spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire in August grass. By the time the snow melted enough for regular travel, everyone in 3 counties knew that Luke Callahan had publicly claimed the sold widow and was planning to marry her come spring. The reactions were predictable. Men gathered at the saloon to speculate about what kind of hold Clara must have on him. Women clustered at the general store, clucking their tongues about the scandal of it all. But there were others, like Emma Patterson, the war widow who'd sent the note, who watched with quiet approval as Luke brought Clara to town more frequently, his protective presence daring anyone to speak against her. It was during one of these trips in late January that the ugliness reached its peak. Clara had gone into Morrison's alone while Luke loaded feed at the granary. She was examining fabric for new curtains when she heard the voices behind her. Can you imagine letting that creature into Mary Callahan's bed? It was Agnes Morrison, speaking to a customer Clara didn't recognize. Mary was such a delicate little thing, so refined. And now this cow who was bought and sold like livestock. I heard she trapped him, the other woman said eagerly. You know how desperate women can be. Probably climbed into his bed uninvited, and that's enough. Clara turned to find Emma Patterson standing behind the gossiping women, her usually gentle face stern with disapproval. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with silver threading through her dark hair and kind eyes that could turn sharp when needed. Mrs. Patterson, Agnes said coolly. I didn't realize you were there. Obviously not, or perhaps you would have remembered your Christian charity. Emma moved past them to stand beside Clara. How are you, my dear? I've been meaning to visit, but the roads have been so poor. Clara found her voice. I'm well, thank you. And Luke, I haven't seen him look so content in years. Emma linked her arm through Clara's as if they were old friends. You must give me your recipe for that molasses cake he was raving about at the feed store. Agnes Morrison's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Mrs. Patterson, surely you don't approve of this arrangement? Emma's smile could have cut glass. What I approve of is love. Mrs. Morrison, something that's been in short supply around here. Now, if you'll excuse us, Mrs. Callahan and I have shopping to do. She steered Clara away, keeping up a stream of cheerful chatter about recipes and gardening until they were outside. Only then did she stop, turning to face Clara with concerned eyes. Are you all right? Clara's hands were shaking. I should be used to it by now. No, you shouldn't. No one should have to get used to such cruelty. Emma squeezed her arm. I meant what I said in my note. Mary would be thrilled to know Luke found happiness again. She worried so about him being alone. You were close to her. We wrote letters. She was lonely out at the ranch, and I understood that. My Herbert was gone. Her mother had passed. We became friends through our correspondence. Emma smiled sadly. She told me once that if anything happened to her, she hoped Luke would find someone strong, not another delicate flower, she said. Someone who can match him, challenge him, stand beside him through the hard times. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm trying to be that. Oh, my dear, you already are. Why do you think they're all so threatened? You and Luke, your love, it challenges everything they believe about worth and propriety and who deserves happiness. Emma pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, pressing it into Clara's hand. Don't let them make you small. Not when love has made you both so large. At that moment, Luke appeared around the corner, his face tight with concern. He relaxed slightly when he saw Emma. Mrs. Patterson, Clara. Are you ready? The wagon's loaded. Almost, Emma said before Clara could respond. But first, you must both come to dinner Sunday after next. I won't take no for an answer. It's been far too long since I had company, and I want to hear all about your wedding plans. Luke glanced at Clara, who nodded slightly. We'd be honored, he said. As they drove home, Clara told Luke about the encounter in the store. His hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't turn back. I'm proud of you, he said finally, for standing tall, for not running. I wanted to run, Clara admitted, but then Emma appeared like an avenging angel. She's good people. There are others too. Jim Watts at the bank, Doc Hartwell, the Reverend Johnson. Not everyone in town is narrow-minded. Reverend Johnson? Clara was surprised. But won't he refuse to marry us, given my circumstances? Luke smiled grimly. I already spoke to him. He said God's love doesn't measure worth in silver dollars, and neither does he. We're set for the second Sunday in April, if that suits you. April, less than 3 months away. Clara's heart raced at the thought. The dinner at Emma Patterson's proved to be a turning point. She invited several other guests, Doc Hartwell and his wife, the school teacher, Miss Brennan, and surprisingly, Jim Watts from the bank. I've been wanting to talk to you, Callahan, Watts said over coffee, about expanding your operation. With beef prices rising and the railroad coming through, a man could do well if he had the capital to increase his herd. Luke glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. I'm listening, he said. By the end of the evening, they had the framework of a business plan that would double the ranch's capacity within 2 years. More importantly, they had allies, people willing to judge them for who they were, not where they'd been. February melted into March, and with it came the early stirrings of spring. Clara threw herself into wedding preparations with Emma's enthusiastic help. Her dress would be simple, but new, pale blue wool that brought out her eyes. With pearl buttons, Emma insisted on contributing from her own collection, but not everyone was ready to accept the changing social landscape. One morning, Clara found a note slipped under the door. The words were crudely printed, "Whores don't make wives. Leave before you're ruined him." She was still staring at it when Luke came in for breakfast. He took one look at her face and crossed to her side, taking the paper from her trembling hands. His expression darkened as he read. "Who?" was all he said. "I don't know. It was under the door when I woke." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am ruining you." "Your reputation, your standing in the community." Luke crumpled the note and threw it into the fire. Then he turned to Clara, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Look at me." When she did, his eyes were fierce with conviction. "You've ruined nothing. You've saved me, before you came. I was the walking dead. I had a reputation, sure as a hermit, a man too broken to live. Now I have a life. I have love. I have hope. If that's ruin, I'll take it gladly." He kissed her hard, desperately, until the fear began to ebb from her bones. "We'll hire hands for the spring work," he said when they broke apart. "Men from outside the area who don't know our history and don't care. We'll build something new, Clara, something that's ours." That afternoon, Luke rode into town alone. Clara didn't ask where he was going, but when he returned, there was satisfaction in the set of his shoulders. That night at the saloon, Tom was heard boasting drunkenly about putting the fat widow in her place. The next morning he was found beaten bloody behind the livery stable, with a note pinned to his shirt. "Next time you threaten my wife, they won't find you at all. L.C." No more notes appeared under their door. As March wore on, the ranch began to transform. Luke hired 3 hands young men from Kansas looking for work and a fresh start. They were respectful to Clara, grateful for her cooking and kindness, and if they'd heard the gossip in town, they gave no sign of it. One evening, as Clara served supper to the hands, one of them, a boy named Charlie, who couldn't be more than 17, spoke up shyly. "Ma'am, my ma used to make biscuits, but they were never as good as yours. Could you maybe show me how? For when I have my own place someday." Clara's heart warmed. "Of course. Charlie, come early tomorrow, and we'll make a batch together." Luke caught her hand as the boys filed out to the bunkhouse. "You're mothering them," he said with a gentle smile. "They're so young, away from home." She leaned into his embrace. "Is it foolish to practice for children we might never have?" "No," he said firmly. "It's not foolish to love. Clara, never that." 2 weeks before the wedding, a package arrived from Denver. Inside was a length of white lace, delicate as frost, and a note in an unfamiliar hand. "Dear Mrs. Soon-to-be Callahan, Luke wrote to me about your upcoming wedding. I was Mary's cousin, and I know she would want you to have this. It was our grandmother's wedding veil, passed down through the family. Mary wore it, and now it should be yours. Welcome to the family, cousin, with love and best wishes. Catherine Hayworth." Clara cried over that veil, touching the delicate pattern through her tears. Luke held her as she wept, understanding without words that these were tears of acceptance, of belonging, of finally being seen as worthy of the family she was joining. "I wrote to all Mary's relatives," he admitted. "Told them about you, about us. Catherine's the only one who replied, but her blessing matters. She loved Mary like a sister." The final blow came the week before the wedding. Agnes Morrison arrived at the ranch with several other women from town, their faces set in lines of self-righteous determination. "We've come to talk sense into you, Mr. Callahan," Agnes announced. "This marriage is a mistake. You're throwing away your good name for a woman who makes me happy." Luke interrupted. "Who works beside me, laughs with me, holds me when the darkness comes. A woman worth 100 of you narrow-minded shrews." Agnes gasped. "How dare you?" "No," Luke said coldly. "How dare you come to my home, insult my bride, and presume to tell me how to live my life? You're trespassing. Leave, now." As the women retreated in huffed offense, Clara emerged from the kitchen where she'd been listening. Luke pulled her close. "1 more week," he murmured. "Then you'll be my wife-in-law, as you already are in my heart. And anyone who speaks against Mrs. Luke Callahan will answer to me." Clara lifted her face for his kiss, thinking of the veil waiting in her room, of the new dress hanging in the wardrobe, of the ring Luke had shown her. Not new, but Mary's, which Catherine had said in her letter Mary would want her to have. 1 more week, and she would no longer be the widow sold for $5 silver. She would be Clara Callahan, beloved wife, respected rancher's woman, keeper of his heart and home. It was more than she had ever dared dream, and exactly what she deserved. The morning of April 12th dawned clear and bright, with a kind of crystalline light that made the prairie look endless and full of promise. Clara stood before the mirror in Emma Patterson's spare room, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. The pale blue dress fitted perfectly, emphasizing her generous curves rather than hiding them. Mary's veil, secured with the ivory comb Luke had given her at Christmas, fell in soft folds around her shoulders. "You look radiant," Emma said, adjusting a fold of the dress. "Like a woman who knows she's loved." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted, her hands trembling as she smoothed the fabric. What if Luke realizes he's making a mistake? What if— Stop that right now. Emma turned her firmly to face the mirror again. Look at yourself. Really look. Do you see a mistake? I see a woman who survived loss and humiliation, who found love against all odds, who's about to marry a man who'd fight the whole world for her. That's not a mistake. Clara, that's a miracle. A knock at the door interrupted them. Miss Brennan, the school teacher, peered in. The church is filling up. Mr. Callahan's already there, pacing like a caged mountain cat. I think he's afraid you'll change your mind. Clara's fear evaporated, replaced by fierce protectiveness. Her Luke, worried she wouldn't come. She gathered her skirts and headed for the door. The short walk to the church felt like crossing into a new world. People had gathered outside, some from curiosity, some from genuine goodwill. Clara saw the shocked faces, heard the whispers, but she also saw Emma walking proud beside her, saw Doc Hartwell tip his hat with a warm smile, saw Charlie and the other ranch hands standing tall in their borrowed suits. And then she saw Luke. He stood at the altar in a black suit she'd never seen before, his sun-bleached hair combed neat, his weathered face transformed by the smile that broke across it when he saw her. His eyes never left hers as she walked down the aisle, and in them she saw reflected everything she'd ever wanted to be. Beautiful, cherished, home. Reverend Johnson performed the ceremony with quiet dignity. His words about love conquering all particularly pointed as he looked out over the mixed congregation. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence stretched taut as a bowstring, but no one spoke. Perhaps it was Luke's hand resting casually near where his gun usually sat. Or perhaps it was the fierce joy on both their faces that even the hardest heart couldn't deny. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Johnson said with a smile. Luke cupped Clara's face in his calloused hands, his touch infinitely gentle. My wife, he murmured, wonder in his voice, before kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one eye. The small reception at Emma's house was a blur of congratulations and barely veiled speculation. Clara found she didn't care about the whispers anymore. She was Mrs. Luke Callahan now, and the ring on her finger, Mary's ring, given with a cousin's blessing, felt like armor against the world's cruelty. As the sun began to set, Luke drew her aside. Ready to go home, Mrs. Callahan? Home, their home. Yes, she breathed. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, heavy with promise. When they pulled up to the house, Clara gasped. The ranch hands had been busy lanterns hung from every post. Wildflowers were scattered on the porch and through the window. She could see the table set with their best dishes. The boys wanted to do something special, Luke explained, helping her down from the wagon. Charlie cooked dinner. He's been practicing those biscuits you taught him. Inside, they found a feast waiting, simple fare but prepared with care. A note from Charlie sat beside the plates. For Mr. and Mrs. Callahan on their wedding day, thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Clara cried then, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Luke held her, stroking her back as she wept into his shoulder. Too much? He asked gently. No, she managed. It's perfect. I never expected. To be celebrated? Luke tipped her chin up. Get used to it. You're my wife now. That means something on this ranch. They ate by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing, plans for the ranch, the garden Clara wanted to expand. The foal bell would have come summer, normal things, but made magical by the knowledge that they were planning a life together. When the dishes were done and the candles burned low, Luke led Clara to their bedroom. Someone, Emma, she suspected, had been here too. Fresh flowers stood in a vase by the window. New sheets graced the bed, and a fire crackled warmly in the small fireplace. Are you nervous? Luke asked, standing behind her as she unpinned her veil. Clara laughed softly. We've been living as man and wife for months now. Not the same. His hands came to rest on her shoulders. Today, before God and everyone, I claimed you. You claimed me. Tonight isn't just about bodies coming together. It's about souls already joined, celebrating that union. She turned in his arms, marveling at this rough-hewn man who could speak poetry when moved. I love you. Luke Callahan, I love your strength and your gentleness, your fierce protection and your vulnerable heart. I love that you saw me when everyone else saw only shame. And I love you. Clara Callahan. The name sent shivers through her. I love your courage and your kindness, your determination and your soft heart. I love that you saw a broken man and chose to help him heal. They came together slowly, savoring each touch, each kiss, each whispered endearment. Luke worshipped her body as he had before, but there was a new reverence in it, a sense of sacred ritual. When Clara cried out his name in the darkness, it was both a claiming and a surrender. Afterward, they lay entwined, watching the fire die to embers. Clara traced the scars on Luke's chest, thinking of all the marks life had left on both of them. Do you think they'll ever accept us? She asked quietly. The town, does it matter? Luke caught her hand, kissing her fingertips. We have what we need, each other, the ranch, good friends like Emma and Doc Hartwell. The rest can think what they like. Agnes Morrison said I was ruining your good name. Luke snorted. What good name? The hermit who buried himself with his wife? The man too broken to live? You didn't ruin me. Clara, you resurrected me. A sudden wind rattled the windows, and Clara shivered despite the warmth of Luke's arms. Storm coming, he observed. Let it come, Clara said, pressing closer to him. We've weathered worse. The next morning brought not a storm, but a surprise visitor. Catherine Hayworth, Mary's cousin, stood on their porch with a carpetbag and a nervous smile. I hope you don't mind, she said as Clara ushered her in. I wanted to meet the woman who brought Luke back to life, and to bring you a proper wedding gift. The gift was a quilt, handmade with intricate patterns of roses and hearts. It's from the women in Mary's family, Catherine explained. When Luke wrote to us, we talked it over. Mary wouldn't want her things, her family, to be locked away from him because of grief. She'd want them shared with the woman who made him happy again. Clara traced the careful stitches through her tears. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it well. Say you'll fill this house with laughter again. Say you'll give Luke the life Mary wanted for him but couldn't provide. Catherine took Clara's hands. And say you'll write to us sometimes. You're family now. Catherine stayed for 3 days, filling the house with stories of Mary's childhood, of the family Clara had married into, rather than making Clara feel like an interloper. The stories made her feel connected to something larger than herself. Mary emerged not as a perfect ghost to compete with, but as a real woman who'd loved Luke and wanted his happiness above all else. She'd have liked you, Catherine said the night before she left. You're nothing alike on the surface. She was small and delicate where you're strong and sturdy. But underneath, you both have that core of steel. That's what Luke needs. Someone who won't break under the weight of his love. After Catherine left, life settled into new rhythms. The ranch hands treated Clara with a respect bordering on reverence. The garden flourished under her care. Belle gave birth to a beautiful colt that followed Clara around like a puppy. And every night, Luke reached for her in their bed, still marveling that she was real, was his, was home. Not everyone accepted their marriage. Tom nursed his grudges and his bruises in the saloon, spinning tales for anyone who'd listen. Agnes Morrison crossed the street rather than acknowledge Clara in town. But for every cold shoulder, there was a warm smile from someone else. Emma introducing her to other ranchers' wives, Doc Hartwell asking her advice about herbs for healing, even gruff Jim Watts at the bank calling her Mrs. Callahan, with genuine respect. One afternoon in late May, Clara was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. Luke was out with the hands, checking on the expanded herd, and worry gnawed at her as she recognized the riders, Agnes Morrison and several of her cronies. Mrs. Callahan, Agnes said, the name clearly bitter on her tongue. We've come with a proposition. Clara straightened. soil still clinging to her hands. "Oh, the town is organizing a Founders' Day celebration. We need contributions, food, quilts for auction, that sort of thing. We thought perhaps you'd like to contribute, to show that you're trying to be a proper member of the community." The words were polite, but Clara heard the underlying message. Prove you belong. Prove you're more than the widow who was sold. "I'll make my molasses cake," Clara said calmly. "And I have some preserves put up that might fetch a good price at auction?" Agnes's smile was sharp. "How? Domestic. We'll expect them by Friday." After they left, Clara stood in her garden, anger and hurt warring in her chest. Then she squared her shoulders and went inside to start baking. She'd show them domestic. She'd show them proper. She'd show them that Clara Callahan was a force to be reckoned with. That evening, when she told Luke about the visit, his face darkened. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "No," Clara agreed. "But I want to." "Not for them, for me, for us, to show that their opinion matters so little I can smile while serving them cake." Luke pulled her into his arms. "That's my girl, strong as steel and twice as beautiful." The night was warm, and they made love with the windows open, the scent of prairie roses drifting on the breeze. As Clara lay in Luke's arms afterward, she thought about how far she'd come, from the broken widow worth $5 silver to this, wife, partner, beloved. "What are you thinking?" Luke murmured, half asleep. "That I'm home," she said simply, and in the darkness, she felt him smile against her hair. The Founders' Day celebration arrived with all the fanfare Bitter Creek could muster. Bunting hung across Main Street, and tables groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and preserves donated by the town's women. Clara's contributions, 3 molasses cakes and dozen jars of wild plum preserves, sat prominently on display, though Agnes Morrison had tried to relegate them to a back corner before Emma Patterson intervened. "Your cakes are already drawing a crowd," Emma reported, finding Clara and Luke near the auction platform. "I heard Ben Davis say he'd bid on one even if it cost him a week's wages." Clara smiled, but her attention was elsewhere. Throughout the morning, she'd noticed people watching her differently. Some still whispered and pointed, but others nodded respectfully. The 3 months since her marriage had shifted something in the town's perception, though she couldn't quite say what. The change became clear during the pie-eating contest. Charlie and the other ranch hands had entered, and Clara cheered them on enthusiastically. When Charlie won, covered in cherry filling and grinning broadly, he dedicated his victory to Mrs. Callahan, who taught me everything I know about good food. The crowd's response was warm, genuinely amused. Clara felt Luke's hand squeeze hers as several people called out congratulations. "See," he murmured, "you're winning them over." But the real test came that evening. The town had gathered for dancing in the cleared area behind the church. The musicians struck up a waltz, and couples began taking the floor. Luke stood and offered Clara his hand. "Dance with me, Mrs. Callahan?" Clara hesitated. Dancing would put them on display, open them to judgment and ridicule. Then she saw the challenge in Luke's eyes, the same fierce protectiveness that had made him defend her with his fists. But this was her battle to fight. She took his hand. They walked onto the dance floor, and Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes. The music swelled, and Luke pulled her into position, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers high. "Eyes on me," he instructed softly. "Just you and me, Clara. The rest of them don't exist." They began to move, and Clara discovered Luke danced like he did everything else, with quiet competence and surprising grace. He led her through the steps, his eyes never leaving hers, and gradually, the world did fade away. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand, the solid strength of his shoulder under her palm. When the dance ended, the applause was scattered at first, then grew stronger. Charlie whistled loudly, and Doc Hartwell called out, "Well done!" Even some of Agnes Morrison's circle clapped politely, though Agnes herself looked like she'd swallowed lemon juice. They danced 2 more times that evening, and with each turn around the floor, Clara felt the town's resistance weakening. She was no longer just the widow who'd been sold. She was Luke Callahan's wife, and she danced like a woman who knew her worth. The real shift came a week later, with the July fire. It started in the hayloft of the livery stable, probably from a carelessly discarded cigarette. By the time the alarm bell rang, flames were already licking at the roof. The fire threatened to spread to the adjacent buildings, the mercantile on one side, the schoolhouse on the other. Luke was among the first to respond, organizing a bucket brigade from the well. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a bucket and took her place in line, passing water with desperate efficiency. Her dress was soaked within minutes, her carefully pinned hair falling loose. But she didn't stop. The fire jumped to the mercantile's awning. Agnes Morrison stood frozen in front of her store, watching her livelihood about to go up in flames. Without thinking, Clara broke from the line and ran to her. "The bolt of fabric in the window!" Clara shouted over the roar of flames. "If that catches, the whole store will go!" Together, they ran inside, grabbing bolts of cloth and carrying them to safety. Clara's size, usually a source of mockery, became an advantage as she hefted loads that would have staggered a smaller woman. They worked in tandem, natural enemies united by necessity, until the immediate danger passed. The real crisis came when someone screamed. Little Jenny Hartwell, the doctor's daughter, was trapped in the schoolhouse. She'd been playing hide-and-seek and hidden in the supply closet when the fire spread. Luke started for the building, but Clara saw what he didn't. The roof beam was already weakening, ready to collapse. Without thinking, she grabbed an axe from the fire wagon and ran to the side window. "Clara, no!" Luke shouted, but she was already swinging. The glass shattered, and she could hear Jenny crying inside. The smoke was thick, black, choking. Clara took a deep breath and plunged through the window. The schoolroom was an inferno of smoke and creeping flame. Clara dropped to her knees, crawling toward the sound of crying. She found Jenny huddled under a desk, too terrified to move. "It's all right, sweetheart," Clara said, gathering the child in her arms. "We're getting out of here." But the window she'd entered through was now blocked by falling debris. The main door was a wall of flame. Clara's eyes stung. Her lungs burned. But she held Jenny close and looked for another exit. Then she heard it. Luke's voice, calling her name. Through the smoke, she saw him at another window, already breaking through with an axe. "Here," she called, stumbling toward him. Strong hands reached through, taking Jenny first, then hauling Clara out just as the roof beam crashed down where they'd been standing. They tumbled onto the grass, coughing, covered in soot and ash. "Clara!" Luke's hands were everywhere, checking for injuries. "Are you insane? You could have been killed. So could Jenny." Clara gasped out, then found herself enveloped in Doc Hartwell's tearful embrace. "You saved her," he kept saying. "Dear God, you saved my little girl." The fire was eventually contained, with only partial damage to the 3 buildings. As the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself surrounded by people wanting to thank her, to touch her, to express their awe at her courage. Even Agnes Morrison approached, her usual haughty expression replaced by something almost humble. I owe you thanks," she said stiffly. "For saving my inventory. That was brave." Clara could have been gracious and demure. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "I'm a Callahan. We protect our community. All of it." Agnes flushed but nodded, and Clara knew a corner had been turned. Over the following weeks, the change was remarkable. People greeted Clara on the street. Women included her in their conversations at the mercantile. She was invited to join the church auxiliary, asked to contribute recipes to the community cookbook, consulted about her healing herbs by young mothers. "You're a hero," Luke said one evening as Clara recounted her day. "The woman who ran into a burning building to save a child." "I'm no hero." Clara protested. "I just did what needed doing." "That's what heroes do." He pulled her close, and she could feel the tremor in his arms. "Don't ever scare me like that again." But Clara's newfound acceptance was tested again when she started teaching at the church. with the schoolhouse being rebuilt. Reverend Johnson asked her to help with the children's lessons. Clara was terrified. What if the parents objected? What if the children had heard too many cruel stories about her? Her fears were unfounded. The children adored her, especially Jenny Hartwell, who refused to leave Clara's side. Clara discovered a gift for making lessons come alive, using stories from her own life to illustrate moral principles and practical skills. One afternoon, she was teaching the girls about perseverance when little Sarah Mills asked, "Mrs. Callahan, is it true you were sold?" Mama said. The child broke off. Realizing she might have said something wrong, the room went silent. Clara felt the old shame rise up. But then she looked at the earnest faces watching her, children who trusted her, who saw her as their teacher and protector. "Yes," she said quietly. "It's true. Sometimes life is unfair, and bad things happen to good people. But what matters isn't what happens to us, it's what we do next. I could have let that experience make me bitter and small. Instead, I chose to trust again, to love again, and because of that choice, I found your Mr. Luke and all of you. And you saved Jenny." Another child piped up. "That was really brave. We all have bravery inside us." Clara said, "Sometimes we just need the right moment to let it show." When the parents came to collect their children, Clara braced for complaints. Instead, she received thanks and praise. Mrs. Mills even apologized for her daughter's question, but Clara waved it off. Children should ask questions. It's how they learn. That Sunday, Reverend Johnson surprised everyone by asking Clara to share her testimony during service. Clara's knees shook as she stood before the congregation, but Luke's encouraging smile gave her strength. She spoke simply, honestly, about loss and humiliation, about finding love in unexpected places, about the power of second chances. She talked about the fire, about the moment she decided Jenny's life mattered more than her own safety. "We all have value," she concluded, her voice growing stronger. "Not because of our circumstances or our past, but because we're human beings capable of love and courage and change. I was sold for $5 silver. Yes, but my worth, all of our worth, cannot be measured in coins." The church was silent when she finished. Then Charlie stood up in the back, clapping slowly. Doc Hartwell joined him, then Emma Patterson, then others, until the entire congregation was on its feet. Even Agnes Morrison stood, tears streaming down her face. That night, as Clara and Luke lay in bed, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, I was nothing, she said softly. Worth less than nothing. You were never nothing, Luke said fiercely. You were a diamond covered in dust. All you needed was someone to see your shine. And now you're Clara Callahan, teacher, hero, and the woman I love more than life itself. Outside their window, summer lightning flickered across the prairie, illuminating the land they were building their life on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Clara felt the solid ground of acceptance beneath her feet. She thought of the bitter woman who'd stood in Tom and Martha's doorway just 1 year ago, clutching a carpetbag in her shredded dignity. That woman could never have imagined this. Respect, purpose, a love that defied every expectation. Thank you, she whispered to Luke. For what? For seeing me, the real me. Thank you, he replied, for being brave enough to be seen. The lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, Clara saw their future stretching out like the prairie itself, vast, challenging, but full of infinite possibility. She was no longer the widow sold for $5 silver. She was Clara Callahan, and her worth was beyond measure. Spring came early to the prairie in 1875, painting the landscape in shades of green and gold. Clara stood on the porch of the new house Luke had built over the winter, larger, sturdier, with rooms enough for the family they still hoped to have. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, scarcely daring to believe the miracle growing within. You shouldn't be on your feet so much, Luke said, coming up behind her, his arms encircling her expanding waist. Doc Hartwell says movement is good for me and the baby, Clara replied, leaning back into his embrace. Besides, I have too much to do to sit still. It had been a year since the fire, since the town's perception of her had shifted from scorn to respect. Now, at 30, Clara was not just Luke Callahan's wife, but a pillar of the community in her own right. She taught at the newly rebuilt schoolhouse 3 days a week, led the church auxiliary's charitable efforts, and her home had become a gathering place for ranch wives seeking advice or simply companionship. Emma's coming for tea, she told Luke, and Catherine arrives next week for the birth. Luke's arms tightened protectively. He'd been hovering since Doc Hartwell confirmed her pregnancy 6 months ago, the joy in his eyes warring with old fears. I'm not Mary, Clara reminded him gently, as she had many times. I'm built for this. I know, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Doesn't stop me worrying. The sound of horses drew their attention. A wagon approached. But it wasn't Emma. Clara's breath caught as she recognized the driver, Silas Crane, the man who'd traded in desperate women. Behind him, huddled in the wagon bed, were 3 young women who looked exactly as Clara had once looked, hollow-eyed, desperate, sold. Luke stepped in front of Clara as Crane pulled up. What do you want? Crane? The greasy man spat tobacco juice and grinned. Heard Callahan's ranch was prosperin'. Thought you might need more help. Got 3 fine girls here, fresh from back east. Widow, an orphan, and one whose family don't want her no more. Clara moved around Luke before he could stop her. She looked at the women. Girls, really, and saw herself. One had a black eye, poorly concealed with powder. Another clutched a worn Bible like a lifeline. The third stared at nothing, already retreating inside herself. How much? Clara asked. Crane's eyes lit up. Well now, for you, Mrs. Callahan? How much for all 3? Luke touched her arm. Clara. She looked up at him, and he must have seen something in her eyes because he nodded slowly. $20 each. Crane said, That's a bargain. You'll take 30 for all 3, Luke said flatly. And you'll sign papers transferring any claim. They're free women once they step off that wagon. Crane haggled briefly, but the steel in Luke's voice brooked no argument. Money changed hands. Papers were signed. And suddenly Clara found herself faced with 3 terrified young women. What are you going to do with us? The one with the black eye asked. Defiance and fear warring in her voice. Give you a choice. Clara said simply. Something no one gave me. She brought them inside, served tea and sandwiches despite their protests that they should be serving her. As they ate, ravenously, she noticed. Clara studied them. The widow was Patricia Mills, just 22. The orphan, Susan Reed, couldn't be more than 18. The third, Rebecca Stone, was 19 and pregnant, which explained her family's rejection. Here's what I'm offering, Clara said. Room and board while you decide what you want to do. We need help here, legitimate help with fair wages. Or if you prefer, I'll help you find positions in town or passage elsewhere. But no one owns you. Not anymore. Patricia laughed bitterly. People like us don't get choices, ma'am. I was people like you. Clara said quietly. I was sold for $5 silver, bought to work through the winter, expected to accommodate however needed. Instead, I found love, respect, a life I never imagined. You can have that too, maybe not the same path, but your own path. Rebecca started crying. I'm ruined. My baby. Makes you a mother, nothing more or less. Clara reached across to take the girl's hand. There's no shame in loving someone, even if they didn't deserve that love. Over the following weeks, the 3 women slowly came back to life. Patricia proved gifted with animals and took over much of the stable work. Susan had beautiful handwriting and began helping Luke with the ranch accounts. Rebecca, despite her growing belly, insisted on helping Clara with the household tasks and proved to have a talent for baking that rivaled Clara's own. The town's reaction was predictable. Agnes Morrison made several pointed comments about Clara collecting strays. But Emma Patterson and the other progressive women embraced the girls. Doc Hartwell quietly began checking on Rebecca's pregnancy. Reverend Johnson made a point of welcoming them to church. "You're building quite a reputation," Emma said one afternoon as they watched the 3 young women working in the garden. "The woman who saves lost souls." "I don't save anyone," Clara protested. "I just give them the chance to save themselves." But her work with fallen women, as the town delicately called them, was interrupted by her own body's demands. On a sweltering July day, Clara's pains began. Luke, who'd been hovering for weeks, practically carried her to bed while Charlie rode hell for leather for Doc Hartwell. The labor was long but not complicated. Catherine held one hand, Luke the other, while Doc Hartwell offered quiet encouragement. As the sun set, painting the room in shades of gold and rose, Clara brought forth their son, healthy, loud, and perfect. "He's beautiful," Luke whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. Just like his mother, they named him James Lucas Callahan. James for Clara's father, Lucas for his own. Young Jamie, as he quickly became known, had his mother's dark hair and his father's pale eyes, and a temperament that suggested he'd inherited stubbornness from both sides. The christening was attended by half the town. Clara stood at the font, Jamie in her arms, surrounded by the family she'd built, Luke beside her, solid and proud, Emma and Catherine flanking them as godmothers, Patricia, Susan, and Rebecca in the front pew, Rebecca holding her own month-old daughter, born healthy despite all fears. Even Agnes Morrison attended, bringing an exquisite hand-sewn christening gown. "For the baby," she said stiffly, then added in a rush, "I was wrong about you. Clara, you've brought nothing but good to this town." Fall arrived with its harvest of plenty. The ranch prospered beyond their dreams. Luke's cattle brought top prices. Clara's garden produced enough to feed their extended household and share with neighbors. The 3 young women had found their paths. Patricia engaged to Charlie, Susan heading to Denver to attend teachers' college with Clara's sponsorship, Rebecca planning to open a bakery in town with the skills Clara had taught her. One evening, Clara found the letter she'd been meaning to write for over a year. She sat at the desk Luke had given her for Christmas, Jamie sleeping in his cradle nearby, and put pen to paper. "To the family of Jacob Whitman," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that the $5 silver you received for me has multiplied beyond measure, not in coins, but in blessings. I have a husband who cherishes me, a son who delights me, a home filled with laughter, and a community that respects me. I forgive you for selling me. Without that act, born of cruelty and desperation, I would never have found my true worth. I would never have discovered that I am precious beyond price, that I have strength beyond measure, that I can change lives and heal hearts. I hope you find the peace that your $5 silver couldn't buy. I hope you learn, as I have, that a person's worth cannot be counted in coins, but only in the love they give and receive. With sincere wishes for your well-being, Clara Callahan, a woman worth more than gold." She sealed the letter and set it aside to mail. Tomorrow, Luke would take her to town, where she would teach at the school, visit Rebecca's new bakery, check on the other women she'd helped find positions over the past months. Tomorrow, she would continue building the life that had seemed impossible just 2 years ago. But tonight, she had everything she needed. Jamie stirred in his sleep, making soft baby sounds. Luke appeared in the doorway, his face soft with love as he looked at his wife and son. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, gentle as a blessing. "Come to bed, my love," Luke said, extending his hand. "Tomorrow's a new day." Clara rose, picking up Jamie's cradle with practiced ease. As she passed the mirror, she caught sight of herself, fuller figured than ever, marked by pregnancy and hard work, but glowing with contentment. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the broken widow sold for $5 silver. This woman knew her worth, and it was infinite. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Luke as they prepared for bed. Taking on damaged goods, Luke turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You were never damaged goods. Clara, you were a treasure waiting to be discovered, and I thank God every day that I was the man fortunate enough to find you. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in pristine white, the Callahan family settled in for the night, in the barn. Belle's colt, now a fine young horse, nickered softly. In the bunkhouse, the ranch hands played cards and told stories. And in the main house, a woman who'd been valued at $5 silver held her son and kissed her husband, knowing finally and forever that her true worth had nothing to do with what others would pay, and everything to do with her capacity to love and be loved. The prairie wind sang its ancient song, carrying the promise of more tomorrows, more chances to prove that from the humblest beginnings can come the greatest treasures. And in the warmth of the Callahan home, love wrote its own currency, one that could never be devalued, never be stolen, and would only grow richer with time. Clara's last thought before sleep was a prayer of gratitude for the path that had led her here, for the pain that had taught her joy, for the $5 silver that had purchased her a life beyond price. She was Clara Callahan, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected citizen, and her worth was written in the stars that watched over the endless prairie, countless and eternal. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and finding one's true worth in the Old West. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of romance and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Clara and Luke's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the campfire conversation going.